Hey there, welcome to Business Breakthroughs. I'm your host, Neal DiPentino. So glad you could join us today. I have actually two guests with me today from Brave Core Leadership Consultancy. These guys, they've authored a book together called Brave Together. They're also co-hosts on a podcast called Lead with a Question. Please welcome to the show, Chris Deaver and Ian Clawson. Ian, welcome. Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome, man. Glad you guys could join me. So, like I told you before, I've been doing this for quite a while, but I've never had two guests on at the same time. So this is kind of a first for me, and I'm super excited to see where this thing goes. Because look, we're just a few guys sitting here. We're going to talk a little bit of business. We're going to talk about what you guys do. We're going to talk about your processes. We're going to talk about what your company does, and we're going to talk about how you can help other businesses. So we're going to get into all of that in just a second. But what I'd like to do before we get started with that is I'd like you to tell our audience a little bit about yourselves. We're going to start with Chris. Chris, tell us about yourself, if you would, please.
Sure. Thanks, Neal. Co-author of the book Brave Together, which is about leading, by design and it's, creativity, and then co-creation, which we really believe deeply in. I've spent a lot of time coaching leaders, working within cultures to shape cultures, and kind of to become future oriented at Apple, Disney, other tech companies, and Ian and I met and started co-creating. Right, the book's a result of that. The coaching and culture work that we do with companies is a result of that. And we're really excited to be here.
Outstanding. Ian, tell us about yourself, buddy.
Yeah. So I have a background in healthcare management and leadership. And so I was in the Bay Area where Chris was situated with some of the tech companies he was associated with at the time. And the irony is Chris has a vast experience as a leadership coach, working at these Fortune 500 companies at the highest level. And here I am, I'm more of a practitioner and a leader of, 150 to 300 people at a given space. And so this is where these ideas started to collide. Is we had shared interests in these leadership books, podcasts that we had in common that we were currently listening to. And it just turned into being vulnerable. And we started sharing these ideas we've had. I have this creative side to myself, as does Chris. And I think most of our professional lives, that side of us is kind of guarded. And so we were able to kind of share these ideas more freely with each other. And we ended up co-creating something quite special. A fiction project was our first project that we worked on together. And it was exciting. It brought out a lot of energy in us. And it was something truly special. We ended up zooming out and we're like, wow, this doesn't normally happen like this when you partner with somebody. What is this? And we started to ask deeper questions. And that's how we went down the path of co-creation. And we zoomed out and we're like, how can we help others do what we just experienced?
That's awesome. I've been kind of a solopreneur pretty much my entire life. I've had several businesses. I still own a couple of businesses, and just recently started Titan Media Works with a really good friend of mine, Cash Miller, who owned Titan Digital. And we've worked together on various projects over the years. And it seemed like we always thought that, at some point in time that we would be doing something together. But, the things that we talked about just never really kind of came to fruition till now. And I can honestly say from my own personal experience, working with somebody that you really get along with, that you can collaborate with, is so much better than trying to do it all on your own. Would you agree?
Hands down.
Outstanding.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about your business. The name of your company is Brave Core Leadership Consultancy. Tell us about Brave Core, if you would, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Ian was saying, what we did was, gather and intuit what the kind of principles of the future are, right, for companies, for leaders. And, we've always had a curiosity about this. One of my mentors was Stephen Covey. And, he wrote the 7 Habits book that was pretty definitive. It's also different than a lot of what's out there, even in the marketplace today. A lot of times we get a book that tells us, kind of one principle, right? And then explains it for, 100 or 200 pages. And that's fine, right? There's stories about it, but usually you get into it, 50 or 100 pages in and you realize, wow, this is just that one principle. Where Covey's work of the 7 habits was, 7 principles that had kind of a beautiful tension to them. And it led us into a different future back then. Right. So begin with the end in mind, think win-win, synergize. And we were looking for something like this, but we couldn't find it. And so we decided to write it together. And this is the inception of what became the book Brave Together. And for example, one of those principles, we actually learned it from Ed Catmull, who founded Pixar with Steve Jobs. And we realized that the future is also creative. And, as you said, there's power in partnership and collaboration and working together. And that, that next wave, over time, we saw that industrial age was really about efficiency. And, you go back even to Dale Carnegie and where they focused, on optimizing that. Covey and the knowledge worker timeframe, information age was about effectiveness, being an effective manager, being an effective leader. And so in the future, we see this opportunity that is co-creation, right? And it's amplification of collaboration. And these are things that, AI and technology, let's say, can't do. They cannot do as well as a team that is working, together. The complexity of the human mind, the level of quality that you can produce out of the partnership that happens. We've seen this in Pixar teams, Nike, Apple. And so these are the kinds of things that can power the future. And, with Ed, we learned the principle, and we consider this a meta principle. And so in our book, there's a set of 6 meta principles, that are essentially a frame for any leader, any culture, to build their own first principles that could be shared in an organization. And the first one is lead with a question. That was an experience we had with Ed, and we're sitting with him, and we thought we were going to just have our time with Yoda. We were going to hit the wisdom dispenser, and he was just going to unload. And instead of that, we got a guy who was sitting with us for what we thought was going to be 30 minutes. It was 3 hours it turned into, and he was just listening and asking great questions. At the time, he was Jedi fading out of Pixar, as a founder and leader of Pixar, and then also out of Disney Animation as the head of Disney Animation. But there was also things that he had done to bridge, the work with Marvel and Star Wars as they had come into the fold of Disney. He's a modest guy, so he'd never really talk about that. But one of the examples of that we asked him about was Jon Favreau, who started The Mandalorian. And we thought, there's some connection between these two, because the brain trust work at Pixar, it bears a resemblance of what they've done with Mandalorian, right? And this was a time where they solved for the problem of the other Star Wars movies, which was they just felt like siloed movies, 7, 8, and 9. And this is ammunition for a lot of debate that goes on still to this day, right? Were they good? Were they bad? We don't know, depending on who you ask and what they were feeling at the time. Or maybe it's a mixed bag per movie. But The Mandalorian seems like there's a very strong consensus of agreement on how great that show is. And it really boils down to Favreau and a team, a brain trust of people, of directors coming together, very diverse people, thinking differently, and in the context of a team. And so what does Brave Corps do, for leaders and cultures? Well, we offer a path to, building a brain trust and a team. And in Ed's words, he said this about Brave Corps. He said, "You've cracked his focus was on creatives and, creative companies. But he said, you've done this so that any person in any domain, can do this. And so that's the intent of the book. That's the intent of our work as coaches and advisors, consultants. It's to spend time with leaders and teams and organizations to build that future culture that they're looking to.
There's definitely power in collaboration, and you're absolutely right. I look at AI right now. I actually just had somebody on not too long ago who was an AI expert, and even she admitted that without the human touch, AI really doesn't matter. If you combine the two, it's kind of cool. You can do some amazing things. But I love that collaboration. I like the idea of working with people who have different thought patterns and think, we all thought the same way. What would we come up with? Like, probably not very much fun stuff. So Ian, can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about, you talk about building high growth cultures. How does that all work out for you guys? How's that work?
Right. So, this is the Wild West. I mean, most employees' experiences are, we just had the Great Resignation, right? Just recently talked about over the last few years, quiet quitting is another trend that's perking up. People have been very dissatisfied with their work life experience, right? And so you see this push for remote work, you see a mass layoff from employers, and it's this, I think it's this time that we're in that people are trying to reimagine how this is all going to work out. And so this is where Brave Together comes in, our book and the material, the principles, the co-creative patterns. What we see is the current leadership landscape tends to resist creativity, right? They have these antibodies and they don't want to disrupt the status quo. They have figured out certain things that have attributed to their successes, but for that long-term growth and scaling and to maintain success, we see that companies that are slow to adopt these creative principles or leadership practices, they're struggling, right? They're struggling to retain their employee base, and they're fearful, quite frankly, of a lot of the technologies that are surfacing like AI. And to your point, we see AI as an extension of our creative capabilities, right? It should be viewed as a tool. The current applications that are out there requires human imagination and prompts. And it's pretty incredible what it can spit out and even the art that it generates. But we still need this, a portion of human imagination and creativity to unlock these things. And this is the great opportunity for employers who have been standoffish about creative ideas. They want to lead with answers. They want to come to meetings and have everything prepared and it's polished, the talking points, through HR, and we need to reimagine workplace culture. And that's what we do, is we help with this transitioning phase we're in with life, is how can we approach these things in a principled way?
It's really interesting. So when you talk about creativity in the workplace, we're not talking about, marketing and creating, this or that. You're talking about a creative way, if I understand this correctly, creative way to actually conduct your business and to interact with your employees. Can you give some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah. So one simple one is, if we take the lead with a question kind of meta principle further down, to Ian's point, in a very practical way. And this is actually something they do at Pixar. They'll plant a question a week in advance. So instead of sending out an agenda, they'll send a question. And what that does is it opens up possibilities, right? It doesn't say, because an agenda can look like, oh, that's baked, right? We're just going to show up and the leader's going to tell us, they're going to talk through this agenda. And not to diss on agendas too hard, but it's not as powerful as a question. And so you could have an agenda, but you could have a question as well that says,
I do the agenda. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of about the macro idea, right? That we're wrestling with as a team, because the intent is not, hey, let's just come in and have an exchange. Let's just transact ideas. No, a meeting, for it to be truly meaningful. And we've seen this in places like Apple, where you have these engineers who have written white papers and gotten PhDs, and then they sit at the table, but they're humble to the universe. It's ego free. Building blocks are on the table, and everybody's just looking to unleash the magic of essentially revelation, right? Things that didn't exist before we entered the room or the Zoom room. And so you can plant a seed, week in advance, and then in the course of the meeting or the conversation, let people check in and allow for this kind of brave space where people are, they're asking powerful questions, and it's kind of more open-ended. And so you can lead with powerful questions yourself as a leader. And what that does, it just unlocks people, right? It unlocks possibilities, their imagination. I mean, to your point about AI being, if it's soulless or if it's disconnected to these kinds of interactions, I mean, then we get like Marvel, for example, Secret Invasion, that show, they did the intro of that with just AI, and I don't think they really did a lot of the stuff we're talking about. And so I was talking to some Marvel folks, and they made a formal apology to me about the intro, and it's bad. I watched it with my son, and I was like, I can't understand what this is all about. But they've done other things that are amazing, right? The movie Endgame, but that's a group of people doing the stuff we're talking about, collaborating, asking powerful questions. Or Iron Man, when they started it, it was the same thing. Downey Jr., Jeff Bridges, Favreau in a room in a trailer, challenging each other and doing a lot of improv, right? Where Jeff Bridges was more comfortable with like, let's have a script, but it's like, no, they're just co-creating, and that was the start of all of that. Yeah,
that's cool. So I'm thinking like we're talking creatives, right? So we all know that creatives think a little bit differently than everybody else to some extent, right? So in my mind, I'm envisioning like a meeting. If you're looking like a board meeting, we're talking numbers and everything. That's not really the kind of meeting you're talking about, right? Or are you talking about more of a creative type? We're getting together, we're coming up with new ideas, we're trying to look at new approaches, that type of thing?
Or just operations, right? Just the routine operations meetings. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It could be a blend of both. Sometimes, I've struggled in certain companies where and granted, like I think there's a time and a place, right, to the question, like where we can do a retrospective, look at financials, have that conversation. But we've seen companies where they stare at P&L sheets all day, right, in all their meetings, and that's not innovation, right, and it's not going to shape their future. And by the way, AI can do this. AI can crunch numbers far better than any human. It can even pull out qualitative patterns based on those numbers. And so what we're seeing is the creative engine, right, for the future, that's also people powered in these team settings. It's largely untapped, right? We talk about the brain. We use about 10% of our brains are unlocked to their full potential. Well, we believe that that's probably true of most organizations in this context. And what happens if they would, right? It could be 10, and literally there's a 10x potential for this. And just some numbers we'll crunch with you. We looked at this holistically with certain companies and brands. So take Nike, for example. They set on a course to shape principles. And that's one thing you can do as well, right? As a company to say, hey, what is our future? And what are the principles, like lead with the question, but for the culture, right? So Nike did this.
That are shared. Yeah.
Right. So Nike did this in the 70s, 1977. A guy named Rob, I don't remember his last name. He literally just intuited, what are the principles that we live by at Nike, and what is the future principles? And he wrote these down, and he just went around taping them on people's doors. And you fast forward to today, and a Nike historian looked back and he asked a lot of people, like, was this real? Like, Phil Knight didn't sanction this. Like, this didn't look official, but was this true? Like, was this true to who Nike was going to be and started, being as a culture? And everybody said, yeah. Rob was kind of pulling this from different places and aggregating that future. And now you fast forward and you look at Nike's performance in every in categories as far as culture. You can rate them comparative to other companies, Asics, Skechers, and others. And Nike consistently scores 80 or 90%, also with customers, right? Whether it's inside culture or outside with customers, it's at 80 to 90%. Other companies like Skechers, Asics are about 60%. The difference of growth or impact of that is 10x, right? As far as revenues, it's a massive difference. But that, if we think about for entrepreneurs or anybody that's running a company, is also true in any industry. So we've had experiences with leaders who've asked us, hey, come do some team building, do some work with our team. And we boil it down and say, and they'd say like, oh, well, we're not sure. One example specifically, a leader running a team, an organization, about 100 people. And he said, I don't think they're all that committed. And we said, okay. And he said, I want you to do some team dynamics, especially me and my co-founder and with the organization. We said, well, let's ask some more questions. What's your vision of the future? He said, exit strategy in 3 years. We get to 45, he was at 15 million. I want to get to 45 million, then I sell. And we said, okay, do your people know that? He's like, yeah, why? He said, well, you said they're not committed, right? And so you're showing up with a pina colada on a beach, in 3 years, and that's your your approach to your work, right? And you're saying, and so they're kind of having that same experience. So we just coach to say, hey, zoom out, step back, start to build these first principles, build a brain trust, right? Of people that are wrestling with the question.
Involve your team in the future.
How do we build a great culture together, right? What is a great culture? And if we have these goals, like how do we achieve these? So fast forward about a year, he calls us and he says, wow, that culture work we did has changed everything. We just had $1 million day yesterday. Wow. They were at 150 million a year, from 15 million to 150 million a year. They went public. He's selling his part of the business now, but he got into culture, right? Which was, hey, what's this going to be in the future as well? It's something to be proud of, right? So he's still involved as an advisor, but he feels really gratified to know that, it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about far more. And that's true of, Steve Jobs or Ed Catmull or anybody we talk about. Their most important product was the culture.
Well, so something I was thinking about as you're talking is that, again, I'm kind of going back to the whole meeting situation and in creating this creativity within the company. Obviously, creativity is a fun thing to do. I mean, everybody wants to be creative and everybody has ideas. I know in our own organization, sometimes we do meetings and we're firing ideas back and forth at each other, like at rapid fire pace. And like some of the ideas are great. Some of them aren't even executable. But at some point in time, you got to look at it and go like, look, we got this big old pile of ideas and we haven't done anything but throw ideas back and forth at each other. So how do you control something, or do you need to control something like that?
Yeah, I think it's more of channeling the energy, let go of the control and focus on connecting with your team. And that starts off as ideation, what you're describing, right? But we ultimately need to let the best ideas win. And so where's that energy going to take it from ideation to builds? And once it starts to get practical and maybe there's some resources and there's a green light to pursue some things and to see where it could go, that's where you focus the energy. And if it's tied to your business strategies and the forecasts and all that, great. It's going to move the needle and your team is going to help you get there, is the idea.
Yeah, the process could be, you could split it out too. If, in Dean's point, you follow the energy. The Imagineers at Disney would split into 2 meetings where they'd have expansion of ideation and then contraction of focus on, direction.
What are we going to decide on, right? And what are we going to actually build?
So then people, you don't have to bump into people's feelings about like, well, we're, deciding or criticizing idea. You just expand first. Next meeting is like, okay, let's decide what are we going to, out of all these, we're going to pick. We have a friend that he went to LA Times, and the newspaper business took a hit, right? When digital happened and all these things happened. And so the business was in the red, but, he got his team together and said, let's figure out some ideas, right? What can we do, to have an impact on our business? And they got a list of like 40 or like 100 ideas, and he picked one. They decided together. It was like number 47. It's like, we'll start a podcast. That seems like a small thing, but they actually built what was called the LA Times Studios around this, and it turned into a $10 to $15 million business. It went in the black. It helped their whole entire business, but they also had a lot of great success with those shows. And it turned out because he asked the question and they, opened up as a group, and then they followed through and actually built it.
That's really good. So what I'm hearing you say is like, there's actually 2 steps in that whole process. The idea, you call it ideation.
Ideation, yeah.
Okay, sorry. So that's part 1. Then part 2 is just kind of just figuring out what that best idea or those best ideas are, and just drilling down and trying to execute on those ideas. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. Because you couldn't do all 100, for example, but you could say, hey, that one and maybe the other 2, and then you focus, right, the direction, towards that.
And you could spend 2 months on a build that the energy took you there, and you need to pivot as a team, and that's okay too. You can go back to the ideas on the board that were generated from the team and pivot and pursue true north. Right.
I love that. I'm thinking of some small business clients that I've had, people that I know are in business and everything, who, they lead their business kind of from a position of authority. They don't really, let the staff really get involved. It's like, this is what we've done before. This is what we're doing now. This is what we're going to do forever. Okay. So
It's
just
disempowering,
do it.
right?
Right. Yeah, it really
Yeah,
is. So then all of a sudden you can't find an employee that wants to get engaged or really you lose that loyalty
exactly.
and just the performance goes down, I would imagine, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
performance and it's innovation, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think going back to innovation is like we have so much that's untapped, right? That has not been built. And granted, you could have a leader who's had a pretty successful business and they feel very confident about, hey, the revenue stream, they've kind of figured it out. But it's a what if question, right? What if
Mhm.
you unlock the 10x capability of your people, or 100x, right? Like what does it turn into, right? What could that become as far as
And
ideas, products, services, all of it? Yeah.
to be fair too, I think a lot of people struggle with their creative identity. We tend to see others as being more creative than us. They fit a certain department, right? You were talking about marketing and some other creative type of jobs that exist currently. And so part of what we do with our coaches, we help current leaders see themselves as co-creators, kind of unlock that within themselves, not just creators, but how to do it with others. And then creatives, a lot that are freelancers, they struggle with the business components of how to make a living, and they're starving artists. The
Right.
majority are. And so how can we get them to become leaders that are principled in a principled way and find success in working with others? So it's the yin and the yang, and it's bringing people together, right?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of like what you mentioned at the very beginning is just it's more of a communication type thing. Several years ago, I went to a social media boot camp, and I sat in on a seminar on how to deal with creatives, how to not deal with, but how to communicate with creatives. And they kind of explained, and I feel like I'm a pretty creative guy, but that's not what my business is. I'm more on the sales side of our business and everything. But it was funny because as they were talking, I could go back in my mind and remember certain situations where I'd had conversations with people and it went terribly wrong because of just, I didn't communicate properly. And I think they were saying something like, a lot of creative people, they're really invested in their ideas, and that when you say you don't like their ideas, they in their mind they're thinking like you don't like me, and
That's a
that's
very
really
good point,
that's
right?
really not the case, but that's the thought pattern, I think. And so we need to learn how to communicate better when we're dealing with people who are a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a great
Absolutely.
example too, because one of the great opportunities for leaders, if they're asking themselves, listen to this, like what can I do? Where do I start? It's what you highlighted, right? It's what we call the mirror test, which is, as we learn, as we grow, because we're all growing, is asking ourselves the question, what can I do differently? Right, especially as we look at this future, we look at these rising generations. It's a different tone, vibe. There's technologies that are emerging that we all, and none of us can keep up with. Right. I mean, it used to be where, but now we have things, with AI. It's like, well, there's a new release every probably the time we've been on this call, there's been like probably 10 new releases of who knows what, right?
Updates
Platforms.
to current technologies, right?
And so we'll never be able to keep up. But the beauty is the potential, and yes, the complexity, but the opportunity, right, to build things together. That's proven, and that will be true, in 10 years, and 100 years, 1,000 years. And so it's really a question of how good can we get at building the future together.
Outstanding. Well, guys, I just kind of glanced at the clock and we're like already over. This has been so interesting. We could go on forever. And I actually think at some point in time, I'm going to talk to my folks. I'd love to have you back and talk a little bit more and go into a little bit more detail. But because we have come to the end, I'd like to ask you one last question. I just basically would like you to, if you have anything, any parting thoughts you'd like to leave with our audience today.
Sure. I'll take the first stab at that. Is co-creation isn't this next shiny next wave. Like we're all told to work harder, work smarter. And so coming off of a book that we just wrote, we know that some might perceive that as like low-hanging fruit. Oh, if I just do this, it's going to give me the edge in business. We understand that co-creation is messy. And so just be patient with others, right? We need to be patient with ourselves and be brave, and we need to try new things. And it's not about 10,000 hours to gain experience. It's about 10,000 iterations, right? Which Naval Ravikant says so brilliantly. But there is hope in co-creation, and it's worth the messy parts. It's worth the struggles. It's worth the learning curve to get there, because the end result can be such beautiful products or a beautiful business or solutions for customers. And so we just want to leave people with that sense of hope that we live in tough times, and the current job landscape, the work environment looks a little grim right now. But these are the things that we're dreaming of, and we want this to become a shared dream. And so if these principles can offer guidance and direction and hope, then amen, that's what we want.
Outstanding. So if our audience would like to get in contact with you guys, learn a little bit more about your business, learn a little bit more about how to get your book, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can go to www.bravecore.co. So bravecore.co. And, we've got resources and information there, frameworks you can download for free. And then there's also the book that you can access there or on Amazon that's available now. So we'd love to connect. And, we are excited about the future. And one of the favorite quotes I have is Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. It's the preview of life's coming attractions.
That sounds awesome. I can tell you guys are passionate about what you do. I can tell you work really well together. We were talking about at the beginning of the show, this is the first time that I've actually had two people on a show with me. And I'm thinking I wonder how this is going to go. But you guys really kind of complement each other very well. So congratulations. I guess that's that co-creation thing, right?
That's right. Man.
Absolutely. Yeah. Neal, it's been fun to get to know you, meet you, and have this conversation today.
Well, fantastic. Look, again, we're going to try to get you back here, talk a little bit more. Very interesting stuff, guys. Hey, take a look at their book and get in contact with them. You'll also find all that information in our show notes. Folks, that's all we have for today. That's our show. We actually went a little bit over, but this is so exciting. Been a great, great day. Listen, Business Breakthroughs is sponsored by Titan Media Works. Check us out at titanmediaworks.com. That's work spelled WORX. And also check out all of our other great hosts on the Small Business Delivered Network at smallbusinessdelivered.com. Until next time, take care. Have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.